You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
This is Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, coming into your live. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks for being here once again. Be sure to refer the show to your friends, families, relatives. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Tell them, hit the bell notification button. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. See everything you're reading and reviewing over there. Also go to all of our groups, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all those crazy places that we're at on the internet. You want to check that out as well. We are, of course, talking with so many people these days. You definitely want to subscribe to the show. Give it a referral. Go over to itunes.com and give it a referral. Say, hey, great things about the show. Give that 5-star rating. That really helps us out. We really appreciate that. Today we have an amazing gentleman on the show. His name is Dr. Andrew Ward. He is the podcast host for his podcast called Into the Fix. And this thing is out on iTunes, and we'll find out more about it from Dr. Ward. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ward. How are you?
Very good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
There you go. Thanks for coming by. So Dr. Ward, give us your .coms where people can find out more about you on the interwebs.
Intothefix.com, and then the podcast is on all the major sites, so you can get that anywhere.
There you go. Order that up. Subscribe today. So tell us a little bit of background history on you and what got you into your podcast.
Sure. I grew up in Indianapolis in a trailer park. Eventually kind of made my way to studying religion and philosophy. Along the course, realized that probably wasn't going to be a place I wanted to land, and made my way into psychology. Eventually came out to Pittsburgh, went to Duquesne University and got a PhD in clinical psychology. Went to work for the federal government, worked in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, worked with drug addicts, ran a treatment program, ran a sex offender treatment program. At the same time, my wife and I were having our son, and we decided to open a private practice so that she wouldn't have to go back to work at the hospital she was working at. And so over the course of 12 years, we went from her and I working out of one room to having 35 contractors who work for us, seeing about 500 appointments a week.
That's a lot of people, man.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of, and what was your relationship with your mother going on?
Yeah, a lot of it. I don't hear much of that. I hear much relationship with your wife.
So those
I hear those a lot.
So you did that for how many years?
I worked in the federal prison for about 12 years, and then I left and I came to my private practice, and we've been doing that it's been open for about 12 years as well.
Wow. So you got a lot of experience with people in their eggheads that are coming in broken, going, please fix me up. What motivated you want to start the podcast?
Well, one of the things that I used to tell people was, the issues I saw when I worked in the prison and the issues I see in my private practice aren't that different. They're actually the same issues. They're just sort of presented in different ways. So in my private practice, I might have a guy whose wife's upset because he works too much and doesn't see their kids. Mm-hmm. In prison, you might have a guy who has 5 kids and he's never seen any of them. It's sort of the same issue. It's just the extremes. It's very different as far as the extreme. And so I decided to start a podcast because I found myself saying the same messages over and over. And so I thought that it might be good to sort of condense some of these messages into bite-sized pieces that people can listen to, get a little tune up, and then kind of go about their lives. And a lot of things I do are really common sense, very sort of practical, like this is the idea, and then this is very concretely how you actually do it in 10 minutes or less is the idea.
And it looks like, looking across the episodes, it looks like it's real relationship focused.
Yeah, generally it can be relationships. A lot of things I'll talk about is sort of people being more compassionate to themselves, being kind to themselves, because I think that also affects relationships. I think the way you feel about yourself affects the way you treat other people.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of, one thing I say a lot to my clients is that everybody agrees that everybody makes mistakes until it's them.
Mhm.
And then people get really harsh on themselves and really hard on themselves for making the same mistakes that everybody else has made. And so part of it's relationships, part of it's really just about self-acceptance and sort of just being a better version of yourself. At the end of the day, I don't think people are inherently bad. I think people are inherently confused. And so I think life's hard. And so I think anything to make it easier.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how people just jump right into being in a relationship and they jump into being in a relationship and they're bringing all their childhood trauma and maybe sometimes undeveloped skills as a human being. I
Right. Oh,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, and they just take it right into a relationship and start having kids, and that's a whole new complication of itself. So yeah, I noticed you make these fairly short, so that tell us why that is.
Well, I think that a lot of people, like I said before, I think a lot of people are resistant to therapy just because of the idea of it. And I see a lot of, having worked in the prison, I got used to working with all types of people because you'll see CEOs who are in there for embezzlement. You'll see dudes who are in there for looking at child pornography. So you have people from all different sort of walks of life. And I think generally people have a fairly small attention span. I think probably 10 or 15 minutes is probably about what most people have to offer. And
Wait,
so
what did you say? No,
that
I'm
most
just
people
kidding.
have about 10 or 15 minute
I'm
attention
just
span, right? And so
I'm just kidding, Dr. Ward, though.
yeah. But, so I try to keep it short because I think that after about 10 or 15 minutes, I think people start hearing Charlie Brown's Teacher.
That's probably true. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, that's true. So do you hope that this encourages more people? You mentioned, get more people into therapy.
Yeah, I think, or, one of the things that really sort of, I don't know about your politics, but I think everybody would agree that the temperature is pretty high right now in this country. Like everybody's just sort of just irritated. And I was in the airport the other day and I was just stunned about how just rude people were. Things that wouldn't have happened 5 or 6 years ago, literally, like the plane taxied and before, it had even stopped, people were out grabbing their stuff, jumping in front of each other to get out of the plane. And they just do more courtesy, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And so part of it would be that people would get into therapy. I think the other hope would be that people would listen to these and just sort of slowly start kind of tuning things back themselves. Like even if you don't need to go into full out therapy, to me, I don't think everybody needs therapy, but I think probably everybody can make a little tweaks here and there.
I definitely need therapy. I probably need therapy most of my life.
Yeah.
Reading through some of these things here, accepting your partner, forgiving your partner, plans versus goals in a relationship, accepting your past, comparing yourself to others, facing your past. Yeah, it's interesting to me. We've had a lot of great authors and people on the show, and it's interesting to me how much your trauma from childhood shapes your whole freaking life. Like
I agree.
you take everything and just go right back to zero, and there it is.
Well, I would even say, to me, it doesn't even necessarily have to be trauma because one thing that, to me, I don't think our parents make us who we are. I think our parents set a template for what we expect. Meaning if you grew up in a household where people are critical, I think you're going to view the world as a very critical place. If you grew up in a household where people tell you, just try your best and everybody makes mistakes, I think you're going to see the world as a more forgiving place. And so I think our parents set a template for sort of what we expect from the world. And, when you mentioned sort of the relationships thing, it took me a second to figure out what you were talking about. Each month I've been doing themes, and one of the themes was relationships. That's why there was 3 or 4 of those in a row. But I think parents set that template. And so, I don't think it's always trauma. Sometimes I think it's the more subtle things that they did a study a few years ago, and they were looking at how kids responded to trauma in their life. And what they found was that a kid who goes through sort of a severe traumatic event, kind of a single time, maybe a 14-year-old girl who's kidnapped and raped or something like that. And they were comparing that to people who didn't go through anything traumatic, but had sort of kind of chronic criticisms or sort of chronic put downs from the parents were judgmental, those sort of things. And what they found is that the people who went through a single event actually were less impacted than people who went through being criticized and judged sort of consistently over time. And I think the reason is because people can look at sort of the major event and say, yeah, that was wrong. But when you hear every day that you're being criticized, I think you start to accept that that's normal. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's less the traumas that affect people. I think they do, but I think it's the more subtle things that we internalize, I think become just as problematic.
Yeah. I mean, I talked a little bit about this in my book on leadership, and people, you can say one thing, you put up PR, whether you're a leader or whether you're a parent. Parents are leaders in themselves, I talked about. And, you can tell your kids one thing, but if you act in accordance, in direct opposition to that, then they see it, you don't watch what people say, watch what they do. And that's what kids do. And so whatever sort of, household thing you run, that's how your kids grow up with that imprint, because I'm not sure if imprint's the right word, but they grow up with that expectation of, okay, well, this is how you have relationships, mommy and daddy fought or hit each other, or whatever the issues were, and so this is what a normal relationship is. So when I grow up, we should do the same thing. And they just take that whole blueprint and go run with it, which is not always the healthy blueprint.
Yeah. Well, one thing that, I have some clients. I live in a suburb of Pittsburgh. I have some clients who are fairly wealthy. And one thing I have a client talk about all the time is kind of annoying. He talks about generational wealth, about how setting up your wealth so that the next generations benefit and that sort of thing, right? And one thing that I suggested to him, because he's got quite a bit of wealth, but his relationship with his kids are terrible. We get into a whole different set of reasons for that, but they just basically feel like the only thing he cares about is money, and they're not that far off. Right. But one thing I mentioned to him is, how about the idea of generational happiness? How about we start raising our kids to be happier than we are? Right? Everybody wants the next generation to be better. How about we start putting the tools into place for our kids to be happy, for our kids to have a more adjusted life, for our kids to roll it back a notch, right? And so the podcast for me is sort of a way to kind of take those things and put them in there. The little things that people need to learn to maybe make themselves a little happier, maybe make their kids a little happier, be a little better parent. To me, I don't need to be a different person. I just want to be a better version of who I already am.
Yeah.
I fundamentally don't think people change that much.
Yeah. Personally, for me, I just need to throw the model out and start over again, evidently, from what my
we could do that.
Yeah, I just go to my psychiatrist and he's like, "There's nothing we can do here."
Yeah, just meds, right?
Like, take this, and it'll keep you out of the rubber bouncy room, and whatever. It's interesting to me how people go about their lives, and they don't work on this stuff. And a lot of times they're on autopilot too. And so
I agree.
They don't really think about anything. You're just kind of going along with, this worked for everyone else, so let's just roll with it. So you keep these to bite-sized tips. Do you hope that can you work with anybody who listens to your podcast around the nation, or is there some sort of an on-ramp that you have with people that they can work with you or get help from you?
Not directly from me. My private practice is bursting at the seams, and so I already have a wait list pretty long. So in some ways, the podcast is a way for me to sort of make multiple copies of myself, to be able to say things to more people than I could if I see them in my office, right? Because I can see 30 people, maybe 35 people. Put out a podcast, one episode could get 300, 400, 500 listeners, right? And so I can get the same message out to 10, 20, 30 times as many people.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things that you mentioned how most people they're kind of on autopilot. And that's something I talk to my clients about a lot, is like working backwards, which is not sort of just saying, I'm on this path, let's see where it ends. How about we say, where do we want to end, and then work the path backwards, right? If I want to end up in this place, what do I need to do to get to that place? Not just sort of a wing and a prayer. Right? Because if you just sort of go along with the ride, you got to be happy with wherever it ends.
Yeah, that's true.
Most people aren't. They get pissed off. They get disgruntled.
A wing and a prayer. I think that was most people live their lives by a Bon Jovi song.
you know, I'm a child of the 80s. What can I say?
There you go. Is it because most people don't do self-reflection? Is that why they just kind of do the autopilot thing? Well, my parents thought this, so I should just roll with it. They don't really sit down and do. Was it Plato or Aristocracies or who was it that talked about self-reflection? Was it Marcus Aurelius on Stoicism? Talked about self-reflection.
I think a lot of people don't have, I think a lot of people lack purpose and meaning in their life. Right. Meaning if there's nothing that really drives you, then there's no reason to really step on the gas. Right. And so I think people a lot of times just spend their lives trying to get to the next day, as opposed to thinking about, when it's all said and done, what do I want to have left behind? Right.
That's true.
And I don't think we're necessarily trained to think that way, right? I think we're trained to think about sort of the next step, right? Like, well, you finished high school, now you go to college. You finish college, now you do this. Now you've been doing this for a while, you should get married. And it's kind of like this linear thing, but it doesn't take into account, do I want to do these things? Or do these things get me where I want to go, right? If I want to be a master carpenter, college isn't on, I don't need to do that. And so like being able to actually be able to say, what do I want out of life? Not sort of what's the easiest thing to get or, what's available, but what do I actually want? One of the things I feel very strongly is I think most people accomplish far less than they could. I think most people hold themselves back by their own limitations, by the limitations they put on themselves. I think people are capable of far more. Like I said, I grew up in a trailer park. My mom was 16. On paper, I shouldn't have ended up with a PhD in psychology. It shouldn't have worked that way. I should have been pumping gas in Indianapolis where I grew up.
Yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of people accept those sort of limitations as opposed to saying, it's my life. I'm not going to lay down. I want to get everything I can out of it. Right.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't really get it till later in life where they kind of, for me, I mean, I didn't go on autopilot throughout life. In fact, I was trying to figure out why everyone else was, but I had my own issues from childhood. And, when I look back on 50, you can finally look back and you can go, there's a whole trail of destruction there, man. And I can see it. It just wanders through the woods there behind me.
Yeah.
I've been carrying all this time. All right. Yeah. Okay. What's this about? What's going on here? You finally reach that point or sometimes you reach a crisis point in relationships where maybe people get divorced or the kids won't talk to them anymore or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. It's really interesting. What are some other aspects of what you're planning for the future on the podcast?
Well, right now what I'm trying to do is just sort of build a listener base, get people invested. I want to really people to start sort of viewing it as kind of a community where you come in on Monday, you get your 10-minute fix. And then, one of the things that I think that, technology and social media, I think has changed everything. And everybody knows that, right? But I think in one ways that I think that it's sort of been detrimental is I think we have this sort of fast food mindset about everything. That sort of the minute I hear something, I'm on to the next thing. Right. And one of the things that I try to encourage people is listen to my podcast twice. Go back and see if there's something you heard the second time you didn't hear the first time, because there probably will be. And one of the things for me is that every lesson doesn't need to be a new lesson. Right. Sometimes it's just saying something you already know in a way that makes some more sense this time, because, generally I don't see 100 different problems in my private practice. I see probably 10 problems, 10 different ways. So there's probably 10 things that people come in with, and then we sort of boil it down from there. And so I think, my goal would be that people start kind of investing in themselves, start, wanting to be a little better person. I think fundamentally people try to do what they think is right. Sort of at my core, I believe in the goodness of people. I don't think that there are very few times people say this is right and this is wrong and I'm going to do the wrong thing. I just don't think people typically do that. I think people typically try to do what they think is right. And then when they look back, they realize, that was not good at all, or that was bad, or that didn't work the way I thought it was going to. Right. I thought leaving my wife for a 25-year-old woman was going to work. Maybe that wasn't the right idea. But in the moment, I wasn't trying to implode the relationship with my kids. I thought I was doing the right thing. Right. I mean, so.
Yeah. I mean,
I think people get much further if they're just kind to themselves, right? Just take it easy on yourself. It's not that bad. You're not that bad of a person.
Is it because some people, they think the whole world, like I meet people sometimes, and I'm kind of surprised at sometimes the age of when I meet people that think the whole world is watching them, that the whole world gives a shit.
Right.
Like you like they're on a TV show and their lead character and the whole world's going, oh, Bob didn't spill his coffee this morning, or something.
Right.
It's interesting how people, they think the whole world's watching, and then some people get over it. They don't, they don't care. They're like, they realize that, like, hey, no one really cares, man. Like no one's watching me. I'm not being rated for this in any way, shape, or form.
Well, and I guess what I would say is, even if people are watching, they're no better than me. So
that's true.
My part of it is, one thing that because one of the things people come in a lot is really sort of self-esteem issues, insecurity, that sort of stuff. I mean, I see that a lot. One thing I say is, I'm not better than other people, but nobody's better than me. And I think that that's a very healthy approach to life, which is, I'm not better than you, but you're sure as hell not better than me. We're all dealing with the same stuff. We're all trying to figure out the same stuff. We're all just doing our best to get through, and so, I'm not a judgmental person, having worked with perverts and pedophiles for 5 or 6 years. I never understood why they did what they did. I can't go that, my brain doesn't go that route. I don't think of kids that way. But what I could relate to is completely imploding your life. I think we all have the possibility to do that at any time. Just start making bad decisions and implode my life. I think I'm fully capable of doing that. And so I never related to what they did. I always related to the fact that given the right situations, I could do something equally bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to ruin your life these days. You see some people that, I see some people that go to jail, and sometimes they just make, some really bad decisions in the span of an hour.
Oh yeah.
And that's all it takes. And then your freedom's over and everything else. And maybe there were lots of things that maybe led you up that you didn't fix that caused you to make those final choices. But we live in a very unforgiving world sometimes. And sometimes you've earned it. If you've done something really heinous. That's the reason they have prisons and everything else.
Well, one thing I think, to me, there are people who make mistakes and there are criminals, and those aren't always the same things, even in a jail setting, right? Because there are guys who their entire life is structured to get around the system, and those are usually criminal dudes. They're going to be criminal no matter what they do. If they're selling a car, they're going to try to skim a little extra money. If they're selling Girl Scout cookies, they're going to try to skim extra money. It doesn't matter. And then there are people who generally lived, I would say, law-abiding lives and then made a mistake. White-collar criminals, sometimes. A lot of times your child pornography guys, they don't have a criminal history other than what brought them into prison. And so, to me, there's criminals and there's people who break the law. And I think most people break the law. I don't think most people are career criminals.
Yeah. It's an interesting road to go down. So anything more we need to know about you and the podcast and what you're doing there?
No, I think it's great.
All right, sounds good then. It's been wonderful to have you on the show. Give us your .com so people can find on the interwebs and get to know better.
Intothefix.com is the name of the podcast.
There you go. And thank you very much, Andrew, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
All right.
All right. And thanks, Minus, for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. Hit the bell notification button on youtube.com/Chris Voss. Also go to our groups, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Subscribe to the big 122,000 LinkedIn group and the big LinkedIn newsletter. That's always fun to see all the time. And wherever the crazy kids are playing on the interwebs. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys